Hello everyone, this is Jody with Grace and Faith, and we are continuing our series for Instapot for beginners, and today we are going to discuss how to convert some of your recipes in order to use it inside of the Instapot. In the past, you may have had a recipe that you love. Most often, most people ask me how to convert slow cooker recipes because those of us with busy families often utilize that slow cooker oftentimes. I had a lot of great recipes that I used in the slow cooker, but if you watched my series before, then you realize that oftentimes I would forget to defrost the meal that I had pre-cooked or pre-packaged and ready to go, and therefore, or I forgot to put it in the slow cooker and then I didn't have meals at night. And so there are ways of converting those recipes that you love into the Instapot. So these are just a couple of simple tips that I have learned myself that I am going to share. First off, remember to adjust the time. Obviously, if it's a slow cooker, you're not going to put it in the Instapot for 4 to 8 hours, right? And so typically if you have a recipe that is 8 hours low or 4 hours high, I have found that it's typically going to be 25 to 30 minutes inside of your Instapot, depending upon the meat, but typically you can pretty sure that it's going to be about 25-30 minutes. Again, as we learned in previous ones, if you open it up and it's not all the way done, throw it back in, throw it in for another 5 to 10 minutes, and it should be great. Which buttons to hit for that time? If it's a recipe that includes a lot of like red meat type stuff, then I will hit the meat and stew button. And if it's a poultry item, as long as it's a fresh poultry, you're not doing like a frozen one, I just go ahead and hit poultry. And most of the time those recipes come out cooked all the way. Number 2, don't forget the liquid. This is a rule all the time with the Instapot. And it still applies even if you are switching over your recipes. So a lot of your slow cooker recipes don't call for a lot of liquids. They don't need a lot of liquids to cook the whole time. So a lot of recipes only call for maybe a 1/4 cup of broth or liquids or whatever. So make sure you adjust accordingly to your Instapot. So make sure you at least put, you can add extra water, extra broth. You can add different things in order to bring that liquid up, but don't forget the broth or liquid, whatever liquid you're going to use. Number 3 is how do you do as far as natural release, quick pressure, or quick release, things like that. So typically what I have found, if I'm doing like a roast or a tougher cut of meat, I almost always do a natural release. If it's something like poultry, sometimes if I'm in a really pressed for time, sometimes with poultry I will do a quick release. But even then, sometimes it's better to let it sit. Poultry's kind of a hit or miss depending upon how you want to do it. But always with meats, do a natural release. If you don't know what natural release and quick release is, go back to the beginning of our Instapot series, and we cover that in the first episode. Next question or next tip that I have is number 4 is spices. So oftentimes what you find in a slow cooking recipe, they have to up the spices because with it simmering all day, oftentimes these spices don't hold the flavor that they would in like a Dutch oven or just cooking in the oven. And so a lot of those increase your spices and herbs. What we found, or at least I have found in the Instapot, is that it actually holds the flavors of those pretty well. Sometimes you might need to add a little bit more, but I would say typically if you're taking a crock pot slow cooker recipe and putting it in here, I would actually back off of some of those spices a little bit, just because this tends to pull out the flavors a little bit more than what a slow cooker would be. Also to note, in a slow cooker, if you put in fresh herbs, it typically does not turn out very well. The flavoring just isn't right. I have found that the Instapot does a great job with fresh herbs. It actually pulls the flavor really, really well. So I typically use fresh herbs in my Instapot. Did I just say slow cooker? If I did, the Instapot uses fresh herbs really, really well, as opposed to the slow cooker, which does not typically, at least in my findings. So if you're going to use the Instapot, feel free to use fresh herbs. It does a nice job in here. Number 5, there are certain things that you really want to avoid cooking with inside of the Instapot. General rule. You want to watch any type of milk type products if you're using milk as a froth or as a cream in there. Sometimes that will cause too much. Your liquid will be too thick and it's hard to come to pressure. Sometimes you can get it, like I've done mac and cheese in here and some people say not to or to watch out for it. Sometimes if you do a milk product, it will kind of froth out of your vent when you go to vent. So just be aware, definitely cover it. Like if you're going to do mac and cheese, which I do actually really like in the Instapot, so obviously that uses milk and cheese. So it's a thicker recipe, but I just cover this with a towel before I release it to make sure that stuff doesn't go everywhere. But definitely watch your milk products. Sometimes that will cause some issues. Wine does not do so well in the Instapot. It doesn't tend to hold the flavor well. So typically if you have a recipe that uses wine, I would suggest adding that at the end for the flavoring so that way it doesn't get ruined in the Instapot. And the last one is any thickening agents that you might use, such as some recipes call for cornstarch or arrowroot if you're doing like a paleo type diet. So if you need to add those type of thickeners, what I typically do, I make a Mongolian beef. I will cook the beef with everything else, and at the end, I throw in the cornstarch or arrowroot, depending upon which one you use. I will throw that in at the end, and I hit saute, and you just bring it to a light boil, and then you can thicken up your sauce that way. Same thing with like your milk or wine. Just throw it in at the end if you need to thicken it up. Obviously, the thickener is more cornstarch, but you can also hit saute just to kind of keep it cooking a little bit to bring out those flavors. But don't put it in at the very beginning because it might not turn out fantastic. And the last tip that I have is don't forget that the Instapot is actually a slow cooker. So if all else fails, you can put it in as a slow cooker if you have, if your slow cooker is broken or something else is going on. You can use this. It will keep it warm just like a slow cooker. You can preset it to start at a certain time. So it does still have a lot of fantastic features that you can use as well. But that's just some tips that I have learned. There might be some other ones out there, and if so, you can feel free to share that with me. But those are tips that I have learned, and I hope that it helps you feel more confident in switching over your recipes that you currently have in order to make them Instapot friendly. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you next time.